Ladies and gentlemen, if we were to take but a fleeting glance at the vast tapestry of creation, what would we see? Perhaps we'd marvel at its beauty or stand in awe of its complexity, but even then, we would only grasp the edges of the great story being written. For behind the veil of time and space, God is doing something big, something far greater than our eyes can see or our minds can fathom. The nature of God's work is both a mystery and a marvel, stretching beyond the limits of human comprehension while inviting us to consider its beauty and purpose. To begin with, God's work is inherently marked by its divine character, intentional, purposeful, and deeply rooted in love. Unlike human endeavors, which are often reactive or born of necessity, God's actions flow from a timeless and sovereign wisdom. His plans are neither hasty nor uncertain, for he operates with the precision of one who holds all things in the palm of his hand. Consider the act of creation itself. It was not born out of need or lack, but out of the overflowing abundance of God's nature. In the beginning he spoke, and the universe leapt into existence, a canvas of stars and galaxies, oceans and mountains, each a testament to his creativity and power. Yet, even amidst the grandeur of creation, God's attention to detail is evident. From the intricate patterns on a butterfly's wings to the delicate balance of ecosystems, nothing escapes his notice. This juxtaposition of grandeur and meticulous care reflects the dual nature of his work, vast in scope, yet intimately personal. Moreover, God's work is often hidden in plain sight. It does not always arrive with thunderclaps or dramatic displays, but frequently unfolds in the quiet and the ordinary. The rising sun, the changing seasons, the laughter of a child, all these bear the signature of his ongoing involvement in the world. It is easy to overlook such moments, dismissing them as mere happenstance or routine, yet they are reminders of a Creator who sustains all things by his power. This subtlety is a hallmark of God's work. Unlike human architects who seek recognition, God often works in ways that seem inconspicuous to us. The growth of a seed buried in the earth is silent and slow, yet it contains within it the potential to become a towering tree. In the same way, God's work in our lives and in the world may begin in ways that seem small or insignificant, but they carry the weight of eternity. His work is also redemptive in nature. Throughout history, God has shown a pattern of bringing beauty out of brokenness, hope out of despair, and life out of death. From the fall of humanity in the Garden of Eden to the triumph of the cross, his work is characterized by a relentless pursuit of restoration. This redemptive thread weaves through the stories of individuals, families, and nations, demonstrating that no situation is beyond his ability to redeem. Additionally, the nature of God's work is deeply relational. Unlike a distant deity uninterested in his creation, God involves himself personally in the lives of his people. He is not merely a craftsman shaping a masterpiece from a distance. He is a loving Father who walks with us, rejoices with us, and mourns with us. His work in our lives is not done apart from us, but often in partnership with our willingness to respond to his leading. Finally, the nature of God's work is marked by its eternal perspective. Where we see only the present moment, God sees the end from the beginning. His work is not confined to a single generation or a fleeting achievement, but stretches across time and space, unfolding a plan that began before the foundation of the world. This eternal scope ensures that nothing is wasted, for even the smallest acts of faithfulness and the most ordinary moments are woven into a story that spans eternity. At the heart of our relationship with God lies a profound tension, the vast chasm between our limited human perspective and the infinite scope of divine vision. We, as finite creatures, are bound by the constraints of time, space, and understanding. Our view of the world is often narrow, confined to the immediate and tangible, while God's vision encompasses not only all that is, but all that ever was and ever will be. This contrast serves as a humbling reminder of our dependence on him and the grandeur of his plans, which extend far beyond our grasp. Human limitations are evident in our perception of time. We live moment to moment, our lives shaped by the present, our memories often imperfect and incomplete, and our future unknown. We may plan and dream, but our plans are frequently disrupted, and our dreams fall short because we cannot see the full picture. We interpret events based on the here and now, rarely able to comprehend how they might fit into a larger narrative. When faced with suffering, we often ask why, when confronted with delay, we grow impatient, assuming that waiting signifies inaction. Yet, what seems to us like delay or silence is often the careful unfolding of a greater purpose, hidden from our view but fully known to God. Moreover, our understanding is limited by our dependence on tangible evidence. We are creatures of sight, hearing, and touch, relying heavily on what we can observe and measure. But God operates in realms that transcend the physical, weaving his purposes through both visible and invisible realities. Just as the roots of a tree grow silently beneath the soil, nourishing and stabilizing it long before fruit appears, so too does God work in unseen ways to bring about his plans. Our inability to perceive this hidden activity can lead to doubt, as we mistakenly equate the absence of visible progress with the absence of divine action. Our finite nature also affects our judgments. We often evaluate situations based on immediate outcomes or surface appearances. We deem events as good or bad, based on how they affect us in the moment, failing to consider how God might be using those very circumstances for a purpose we cannot yet discern. Joseph's brothers saw selling him into slavery as an act of betrayal. Little did they know that God was orchestrating a path that would not only save their family but countless others from famine. This story exemplifies how our short-sightedness contrasts sharply with God's comprehensive foresight. Furthermore, our emotions can cloud our ability to trust in God's vision. Fear, anger, and despair often arise when life does not unfold according to our expectations. When faced with unanswered prayers or unfulfilled desires, we may question God's goodness or doubt his presence. Yet these moments often reveal more about our limitations than about God's faithfulness. We long for control, seeking to map out our paths and dictate the terms of our lives, but God's vision is not constrained by our desires. Instead, he sees not only what we want but what we truly need, guiding us in ways that ultimately lead to our growth and flourishing, even if we cannot recognize it at the time. Another dimension of our limitation is our tendency to focus on individual pieces of life's puzzle without seeing the whole. We might experience seasons of hardship or loss and struggle to find meaning in them. But God, the ultimate artist, sees how each piece contributes to the grand mosaic of his plan. What we perceive as fragments, he views as essential components of a masterpiece in progress. This disparity between our fragmented understanding and his unified vision highlights the profound gap between human reasoning and divine wisdom. Finally, our limited vision is often tied to our temporal concerns. We are deeply invested in the immediate, seeking comfort, success, and security in the here and now. God, however, operates from an eternal perspective, one that transcends the boundaries of time and reaches into eternity. While we may prioritize short-term relief or personal gain, he is working toward purposes that encompass not only our lives but the lives of countless others, weaving together a story of redemption that spans generations. This eternal perspective ensures that no moment, however insignificant it may seem to us, is wasted in his economy. Faith amid uncertainty stands as one of the most profound aspects of the human relationship with God. It requires us to trust in what we cannot see, to believe in what we do not fully understand, and to cling to God's promises when the path before us is shrouded in doubt or darkness. Uncertainty is a natural condition of our existence, yet it is precisely in this space of not knowing that faith is cultivated, tested, and ultimately strengthened. Uncertainty often arises because life does not unfold according to our expectations. We make plans, chart courses, and set goals, but unforeseen circumstances disrupt even our best-laid strategies. In such moments, faith calls us to surrender our illusion of control and place our trust in God, whose wisdom far exceeds our own. This surrender is not an act of resignation or defeat, but an acknowledgement that God's understanding is infinite while ours is finite. Faith invites us to rest in the assurance that He is sovereign, even when circumstances seem chaotic or inexplicable. The nature of uncertainty often stirs fear and anxiety within us. We are, by design, creatures who seek stability, predictability, and assurance. Yet, life rarely offers these in abundance. Whether we face a health crisis, financial instability, or relational strife, uncertainty challenges our sense of security and compels us to confront our limitations. Faith amid such trials is not blind optimism or the denial of reality. It is the deliberate choice to trust God's character and promises in the absence of clarity. It is the quiet, steady voice that whispers, "God is with you even as the storm rages." Biblical examples abound of individuals who demonstrated faith amid profound uncertainty. Abraham, called by God to leave his homeland and journey to an unknown destination, obeyed without knowing where he was going. He trusted in the promise of a future inheritance, even though he could not yet see it. Similarly, the Israelites, standing before the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army closing in behind them, had no way of knowing how God would deliver them. Yet their faith, however fragile, allowed them to step forward, witnessing God's miraculous power in parting the waters. These stories remind us that faith is often accompanied by a lack of understanding, but it is through such uncertainty that God's power and faithfulness are revealed. Faith amid uncertainty is also deeply relational. It is not merely about believing in God's existence or acknowledging His power, it is about trusting His heart. When we do not understand His ways, we are called to trust His character, His goodness, mercy, and unfailing love. This trust is built over time, often through personal experiences of His faithfulness. Each answered prayer, each moment of divine provision, and each instance of comfort in our sorrow serves as a testament to His trustworthiness. Yet, even with these assurances, uncertainty often tempts us to doubt, for faith is a dynamic relationship, not a static state. Uncertainty also plays a vital role in shaping and refining our faith. Just as gold is refined in fire, so too is our trust in God purified through the trials of life. In times of certainty, faith may remain untested and superficial, but in the crucible of uncertainty, it deepens and matures. It is in these moments that we learn to depend not on our own understanding but on God's guidance. This dependence fosters humility, reminding us of our need for Him and drawing us closer to His presence. Moreover, faith amid uncertainty often requires waiting, a discipline that challenges our impatience and tests the depth of our trust. Waiting is rarely comfortable, for it forces us to relinquish control and accept that God's timing may differ from our own. Yet in the waiting, God works in ways we cannot always perceive. He grows our character, builds our resilience, and prepares us for what lies ahead. The story of Joseph illustrates this beautifully. Sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned, Joseph endured years of uncertainty, yet his faith remained steadfast. In the end, God's plan was revealed, and Joseph's journey of hardship became a testimony of divine providence and redemption. Faith in uncertainty also requires a conscious decision to resist despair. When faced with prolonged challenges or unanswered prayers, it is easy to succumb to feelings of hopelessness. Faith, however, calls us to persevere, to hold fast to God's promises, even when circumstances seem bleak. This perseverance is not born out of sheer willpower, but is sustained by the Holy Spirit, who comforts, strengthens, and assures us of God's presence. It is in these moments of clinging to faith that we discover the depth of God's grace and the strength He provides for our journey. Finally, faith amid uncertainty challenges us to live in the tension between the already and the not yet. We stand on the promises of God that have been fulfilled in Christ, yet we await the full realization of His kingdom. This tension mirrors the uncertainty of our daily lives, where we see glimpses of God's work but not its entirety. Faith bridges this gap, allowing us to trust that the same God who has been faithful in the past will remain faithful in the future. Trials are an inescapable part of the human experience, arriving unbidden and often unwelcomed. They challenge our comfort, disrupt our plans, and force us to confront our vulnerabilities. Yet, within the crucible of trials lies a profound and paradoxical truth: they are often the very means through which transformation occurs. It is in the fires of hardship that God shapes, refines, and molds us into vessels of His purpose. Transformation through trials is not merely a byproduct of suffering, it is a divine process, intentional and redemptive, meant to bring about growth, maturity, and deeper faith. Trials often begin by stripping away illusions of control. In our daily lives, we like to believe that we are masters of our fate, able to navigate life's challenges through our own strength and wisdom. But when adversity strikes, whether in the form of loss, illness, failure, or uncertainty, we are confronted with the limits of our own power. This confrontation can be deeply unsettling, yet it is precisely in this vulnerability that transformation begins. When we reach the end of our own resources, we are invited to lean wholly on God, discovering in Him a source of strength and grace far beyond what we could muster on our own. Transformation through trials also involves a reorientation of priorities. In times of ease, it is tempting to focus on transient pursuits, success, wealth, comfort, or recognition. But trials have a way of clarifying what truly matters. They strip away the superficial and redirect our attention to the eternal. Through pain and difficulty, we are reminded of the fragility of earthly things and the enduring nature of God's promises. This reorientation is not always immediate or easy. It often involves a painful process of letting go. Yet as we release our grip on the temporary, we make room for the eternal to take root in our hearts. Moreover, trials are a means by which God refines our character. The imagery of a refiner's fire is often used in Scripture to describe this process, and it is an apt metaphor. Just as precious metals are purified by intense heat, so too are we purified through the pressures of life. Trials reveal our weaknesses, our impatience, pride, fear, or selfishness, but they also provide an opportunity for those weaknesses to be transformed into strengths. Through perseverance in hardship, we develop qualities such as patience, humility, courage, and compassion. These virtues are not acquired in moments of ease, but are forged in the furnace of adversity. Another aspect of transformation through trials is the deepening of our relationship with God. In times of trial, we are often brought to a place of raw honesty, where pretense and self-sufficiency fall away. In this vulnerability, we encounter God in a profound and intimate way. We learn to pray with greater fervor, to seek His presence with greater urgency, and to trust His love with greater depth. Trials become a means of drawing us closer to Him, not because they are inherently good, but because they strip away the distractions that often keep us at a distance. Trials also teach us empathy and compassion. When we suffer, we gain a deeper understanding of the pain of others. Our own experiences of hardship equip us to comfort and support those who are walking through similar struggles. This transformation is not merely about personal growth, but about becoming instruments of God's love and grace in the lives of others. As the Apostle Paul wrote, we are comforted in our affliction so that we may comfort others with the same comfort we have received from God. Furthermore, trials often reveal God's faithfulness in ways that ease never could. In our darkest moments, when we feel most alone or abandoned, we often discover that God is nearer than we realized. His provision, strength, and peace become evident, even when the circumstances themselves remain difficult. These experiences of His faithfulness deepen our trust in Him and provide a foundation for future trials. We learn to say with the psalmist, "Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Transformation through trials also involves the cultivation of hope. While trials often bring seasons of sorrow, they also point us toward the hope of redemption. God's work is redemptive by nature. He specializes in bringing beauty out of ashes, joy out of mourning, and life out of death. This redemptive work does not always happen on our timeline, but it is certain. The story of Job serves as a powerful reminder of this truth. Though Job endured unimaginable suffering, his story did not end in despair. God restored him, and through his trials, Job gained a deeper understanding of God's sovereignty and goodness. Finally, trials teach us the art of surrender. Transformation requires a willingness to yield to God's work in our lives, even when we do not understand it. This surrender is not passive resignation, but an active trust in God's wisdom and love. It is the recognition that, while we may not choose our trials, we can choose to allow God to use them for His glory and our good. This posture of surrender opens the door for transformation, allowing God to work in and through us in ways that we could never achieve on our own. God's work in the world is neither distant nor impersonal. It is an invitation extended to every believer to take part in the unfolding of His divine purpose. This call to participation is one of the most profound aspects of our faith, for it demonstrates that the Creator of the universe, who lacks nothing, desires to involve His creation in the fulfillment of His plans. Far from being passive observers, we are called to be active participants, co-laborers with God in His redemptive work. This participation is not a mere duty but a profound privilege, rooted in love, purpose, and the promise of transformation. From the very beginning, God has designed humanity for participation. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were entrusted with the care of creation. They were given stewardship over the earth, a role that required their engagement, creativity, and effort. This initial call to participation reflects God's intention for humanity to partner with Him, not out of necessity but out of relationship. Even after the fall, this calling did not cease. Instead, it was reshaped by God's redemptive purposes, inviting us to join Him in the work of restoration and renewal. Participation begins with a willingness to say yes to God's call, even when the path is unclear. Throughout Scripture, we see countless examples of individuals who were invited into God's work and responded in faith. Abraham left his homeland, trusting in a promise he could not yet see. Moses stood before Pharaoh, armed only with God's assurance of deliverance. Mary embraced her role as the mother of the Messiah, despite the uncertainty and challenges it would bring. In each case, the call to participation required faith, courage, and obedience, often in the face of significant obstacles. Yet the call to participation is not reserved for the extraordinary or the heroic. It is extended to all believers, in every season of life and in every circumstance. This universal call reflects the truth that God's work is multifaceted and inclusive. It encompasses acts of service, words of encouragement, moments of prayer, and countless other expressions of faithfulness. The Apostle Paul describes the church as a body, with each member contributing uniquely to its function and health. This imagery underscores the importance of each person's participation, no matter how seemingly small or insignificant their role may appear. Our participation in God's work is not dependent on our qualifications or abilities, but on our availability and willingness to be used by Him. Too often we hesitate to respond to God's call because we feel inadequate or unprepared. Yet Scripture is replete with examples of God using imperfect and unlikely individuals to accomplish His purposes. Gideon, who considered himself the least of his family, became a mighty leader. Peter, who denied Christ, was chosen to shepherd the early church. These stories remind us that God does not call the equipped, He equips the called. When we step forward in faith, He provides the strength, wisdom, and resources we need to fulfill our part in His plan. Participation also requires a posture of humility and dependence. It is tempting to approach God's work as though it depends entirely on our efforts, but true participation acknowledges that the work is ultimately His. We are instruments in His hands, vessels through which His power and love are made manifest. This understanding frees us from the burden of striving and allows us to serve with joy and confidence, knowing that the outcome rests in His capable hands. Moreover, participation in God's work is inherently transformative. As we engage in His purposes, we are changed in the process. Our faith deepens, our character is refined, and our understanding of God's heart grows. This transformation is not a prerequisite for participation but a result of it. When we step into the work God has prepared for us, we are drawn closer to Him and conformed more fully to His image. This is a key aspect of the abundant life He promises, a life marked by purpose, growth, and intimacy with our Creator. The call to participation is also a call to community. God's work is rarely accomplished in isolation but through the collective efforts of His people. The early church, described in the book of Acts, provides a powerful example of this truth. They shared their resources, supported one another, and worked together to spread the gospel. Their participation was not limited to individual acts, but was a communal expression of their faith and commitment to God's mission. In the same way, we are called to join hands with others, recognizing that our contributions are part of a larger whole. Participation often involves stepping out of our comfort zones and embracing the unknown. God's call may lead us to unfamiliar places, challenge us to confront our fears, or stretch us in ways we never anticipated. Yet it is in these moments of discomfort that we grow and experience God's power in new and profound ways. When Peter stepped out of the boat to walk on water, he was responding to a call that defied logic and comfort. Though he faltered, his willingness to participate allowed him to witness a miracle and deepen his faith. Finally, participation in God's work is an act of worship. It is a response to His grace and goodness, an offering of our time, talents, and resources in gratitude for all He has done. This perspective transforms even the most mundane tasks into sacred acts, infused with purpose and significance. Whether we are serving in a visible role or working quietly behind the scenes, our participation is an expression of our love for God and our desire to honor Him. An eternal perspective is the lens through which believers are called to view their lives, the world around them, and the work of God. It is a way of seeing that transcends the immediate and temporary, focusing instead on the everlasting and unchanging truths of God's kingdom. This perspective shifts our priorities, redefines our understanding of success and suffering, and aligns our hearts with God's purposes. To live with an eternal perspective is to live in light of eternity, allowing the promise of what is to come to inform how we navigate the challenges, joys, and responsibilities of the present. Human nature is deeply rooted in the here and now. We are creatures of time, bound by its constraints and preoccupied with its passing. Our daily lives are consumed with the immediate concerns of work, relationships, and the pursuit of comfort and security. While these are not inherently wrong, they can often obscure the reality of eternity. An eternal perspective calls us to look beyond the fleeting nature of this world and to anchor our lives in the eternal promises of God. This shift in focus is not a denial of the present, but a reordering of priorities, placing the eternal above the temporal. The Scriptures repeatedly exhort us to adopt an eternal perspective. The Apostle Paul, writing to the Corinthians, declared, "So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." This passage highlights the tension between the visible and the invisible, the temporary and the eternal. The things we can see and touch, our possessions, achievements, and even our physical bodies are transient. They will one day fade away. But the unseen realities of God's kingdom, His love, truth, and salvation are everlasting. An eternal perspective helps us to focus on these unchanging truths, grounding our lives in what will endure. One of the most transformative aspects of an eternal perspective is the way it reshapes our understanding of suffering. Trials and hardships, though painful, take on new meaning when viewed through the lens of eternity. In the moment, suffering can feel overwhelming, consuming our thoughts and emotions. But when we remember that this life is not all there is, our perspective changes. Paul, who endured immense suffering, described his afflictions as light and momentary troubles. When compared to the eternal glory that awaited him, this is not to minimize the reality of suffering, but to place it in its proper context. Our trials, no matter how intense, are temporary. The joy and peace of God's presence are eternal. An eternal perspective also influences how we approach success and ambition. In a world that often equates success with wealth, power, and recognition, it is easy to become entangled in the pursuit of these goals. Yet, from an eternal standpoint, these achievements hold little value. Jesus warned, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven." True success is not measured by earthly standards, but by our faithfulness to God's calling, our love for others, and the fruit of the Spirit evident in our lives. Living with an eternal perspective also deepens our sense of purpose. It reminds us that our lives are part of a greater story, one that began before us and will continue long after us. This awareness can be both humbling and empowering. It humbles us by showing that we are not the center of the universe. Our lives are but a small thread in the tapestry of God's eternal plan. At the same time, it empowers us by revealing that our actions have eternal significance. Every act of kindness, every moment of obedience, and every step of faith contributes to God's work in ways we may not fully understand this side of eternity. Furthermore, an eternal perspective fosters a sense of hope that transcends circumstances. Hope rooted in earthly things is fragile, easily shaken by the uncertainties and disappointments of life. But hope anchored in eternity is unshakable, grounded in the promises of a God who does not change. This hope sustains us through life's trials, reminding us that the story is not over, that redemption is at work even in the darkest of times, and that a glorious future awaits. The book of Revelation paints a vivid picture of this future, a new heaven and a new earth, where God will dwell with his people, and every tear will be wiped away. This vision of eternity fills us with hope and spurs us to live faithfully in the present. An eternal perspective also transforms our relationships. It calls us to see others not as mere acquaintances or obstacles to our goals, but as eternal beings created in the image of God and destined for eternity. This realization compels us to love selflessly, forgive generously, and share the gospel with urgency. When we understand that each person has an eternal destiny, our interactions take on new weight and significance. We are no longer simply living for ourselves, but participating in God's mission to draw people into his eternal kingdom. Finally, an eternal perspective brings clarity and peace amid the uncertainties of life. While the future may be unclear, the ultimate outcome is certain: God's kingdom will prevail and his purposes will be accomplished. This assurance frees us from anxiety and allows us to live with confidence and joy. We may not know what tomorrow holds, but we know who holds tomorrow. This certainty anchors us, enabling us to face life's challenges with a steady heart and an unwavering trust in God's sovereignty.